Hello, dear YouTube viewers. I hope you're doing well. Okay, so let's start our video. The phone buzzed in his hand just as he was wrapping up a long day. A quick glance at the screen froze him where he stood. Her name glowed brightly, followed by words that landed like a punch in the gut. Going on a sudden trip with my ex. Hope you're fine. For a moment his chest tightened. The air felt heavier, and he reread the message as if the words might rearrange themselves into something less cruel. But no, it was plain, casual, almost careless. His heart sank, confusion clouded his thoughts, and an ache settled deep inside him. His first instinct was raw, unfiltered. He wanted to throw the phone across the room, call her immediately, demand to know what she meant by this. A scream rose inside him. No, I'm not fine. How could you even ask me that? But he didn't let it out. Instead, his thumbs moved slowly, deliberately, tapping out a simple reply. No problem. Take care. The words looked cold, detached, but at least they didn't betray his turmoil. On the outside, he was calm and collected. On the inside, he was a storm of disbelief, anger, and heartbreak colliding all at once. It was the perfect example of the constant battle between what he allowed the world to see and what he actually felt clawing at him from within. He leaned back in his chair, staring blankly at the ceiling, memories of their time together crashing over him. They had built what he thought was a strong foundation. Laughter on late-night walks, deep conversations that stretched until dawn, and small acts of tenderness that stitched their days together. Yet beneath the surface, he could admit to himself now, there had been cracks, moments where she seemed distant, times when her phone was more interesting than his words, hints of nostalgia, whenever her ex's name slipped into a story. He had brushed those off as nothing because he wanted to believe in the love they shared. He had chosen trust, but trust was beginning to feel like a blindfold. He sat there, phone still in hand, trying to steady his racing thoughts. This wasn't just about a trip. It was about respect, about boundaries, about the fragile line between love and carelessness. Why would she even think this was acceptable? The message made him question not only her choices, but also himself. Was he too soft, too forgiving, too desperate to keep the peace? As the minutes passed, he drifted into his own history. He thought about his upbringing, how he had been raised in a family where loyalty was non-negotiable, where promises mattered. He had always been the one to commit fully, whether in his friendships, his work, or his relationships. His career, steady but not glamorous, had taught him discipline. His family, modest and traditional, had ingrained in him the importance of respect and honesty. Betrayal, even in small forms, was something he had always feared because he had seen what it could do. His father had once suffered it, and the scars had lingered for years. That fear shaped the man he had become. He valued truth above comfort, and that's what drew him to her in the first place. He remembered the night they met, how her laughter carried across the room, how her eyes seemed to hold a world of secrets yet felt inviting. They had spoken for hours, sharing stories, dreams, and little vulnerabilities. That night, he had thought to himself, this is the one. This is someone I can trust. Now, staring at the casual cruelty of her text, he felt the weight of that choice pressing down on him. The very person he had trusted most had dropped a sentence that cracked open every insecurity he had worked so hard to bury. He loved her, no doubt, but love alone wasn't cushioning the blow. Instead, it amplified it. It made the pain sharper, the doubt heavier, the silence in the room louder. He put the phone down, rubbing his face with both hands, wondering if this was the beginning of the end or just another test of patience. He told himself it was too early to decide, but in his gut, he knew something had shifted. This was not a normal message. This was a spark, and sparks had a way of burning everything if left unchecked. He couldn't stop himself from unlocking his phone again and again, staring at the same sentence like it might suddenly change meaning if he read it enough times. Going on a sudden trip with my ex. Hope you're fine. Each time, the words seemed to cut deeper. Why sudden? Why with him? And why did she say it so casually, as though she was mentioning the weather or a trip to the grocery store? His mind spun in circles, looking for logic, but finding only holes. Every angle he considered opened another question, another sting. He tried to tell himself there had to be a reasonable explanation, but his imagination betrayed him. Throwing images in his head he wished he could erase. Her sitting close to her ex on a train, laughing at inside jokes, sharing secrets she no longer shared with him, maybe even slipping into old habits he didn't want to think about. Each vision hit like a knife twisted slowly. By day, he put on the mask. At work, he greeted colleagues with his usual polite smile, nodded through meetings, made small talk at the coffee machine. No one looking at him would guess his mind was boiling beneath the surface. He laughed when required, kept his voice steady, even cracked a joke here and there. But inside, he was restless, a mess of nerves. Every break, he pulled out his phone, scrolling through old photos of them together, her leaning on his shoulder, her hand wrapped in his, her smile lighting up a dim restaurant. He compared those images to the flat, distant tone of her latest message, and the gap between then and now felt like an abyss. Sometimes he replayed old voice notes just to remind himself of how she once sounded when she said she loved him. Then he'd set the phone down, only to pick it up again 5 minutes later, hoping for another message from her, hoping for reassurance, hoping for anything. When he was alone, the conflict inside him grew louder. One voice in his head urged him to be patient, to trust her. She told you openly, didn't she? That means she's not hiding anything. Don't ruin this by being insecure. If you accuse her without proof, you'll only push her away. But another voice, darker and sharper, hissed back, don't be naive. No woman suddenly goes on a trip with her ex unless there's something she doesn't want to admit. She's testing you, or worse, betraying you while you sit here like a fool. The tug-of-war between those voices wore him down until he didn't know which side to believe. One evening, standing in front of his bathroom mirror, he stared at his own reflection and hardly recognized himself. His eyes looked hollow, his shoulders slumped as if the weight of doubt had physically bent him. He pressed his palms against the sink, leaning closer, whispering under his breath, "What's wrong with me? Why am I not enough? Why would she need him if she has me?" The reflection gave him no answers, only a reminder of how fragile he felt. He realized he wasn't just questioning her anymore, he was questioning his own worth. It was his best friend who finally noticed. They were sitting together at a small cafe, and though he tried to keep up the act, his friend saw through the cracks. "You're quiet. Something's off," his friend said, leaning back in his chair with folded arms. He hesitated, but eventually the truth spilled out in fragments. The text, the trip, the ex, the silence that followed. His friend whistled low, shaking his head. "Man, don't let her play you," his friend said bluntly. "This isn't respect. A woman who values you wouldn't drop something like that on you and expect you to smile about it. You need to set boundaries. Make it clear you won't accept being treated like a backup option." The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they carried a kind of truth he didn't want to face. His friend's cynicism was the opposite of his own forgiving nature. Where he wanted to see love, his friend saw manipulation. Where he wanted to hope, his friend saw warning signs. The contrast left him torn between two worlds, the world of trust he desperately wanted to live in, and the world of suspicion he was terrified might actually be real. As they left the cafe, his friend clapped him on the shoulder. "Respect yourself, brother. If you don't, no one else will." Those words echoed long after they parted, growing louder than even his own doubts. And yet, when he finally lay down that night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, he still couldn't silence the single, aching question: what is she really doing out there with him? The next day, his phone buzzed again, but this time the message carried none of the warmth he longed for. "We reached safely." Just 4 words, no emojis, no softness. He stared at it, waiting, hoping she might add something. "Miss you, thinking of you, talk soon." Nothing followed. Hours later, another text: "Network is weak here." That was it. No reassurance. No sign that she even cared how he felt about this so-called sudden trip. Each message was like a door slammed quietly in his face. He didn't need to be a genius to sense it. The emotional distance between them was widening, stretching into something that felt like a canyon. He tried to brush it off, telling himself she was just busy, distracted, maybe genuinely struggling with reception. But the hollowness of her words gnawed at him. They didn't sound like her, or at least not the version of her who used to stay up late, sending him long paragraphs filled with jokes, stories, and affection. The silence between those sparse updates grew louder with every hour. In the quiet of his apartment, his mind wandered back to earlier days, piecing together fragments of conversations he had ignored at the time. He remembered how casually she had once mentioned her ex, the way her eyes lit up as she recalled something funny he had said, how she had compared the two of them over dinner one night. "You're more stable," she told him with a laugh. He was wild, unpredictable, fun, but too much. At the time, he had smiled, proud to be considered the safer, better choice. But now, that memory left a bitter taste. Had there always been a part of her that missed that chaos, that nostalgia? He thought about the way she'd kept certain photos tucked away, never deleted, even though she claimed they meant nothing. The small hints were there all along, and he hated himself for brushing them aside. Regret crawled up his spine, whispering that maybe he should have asked harder questions earlier. Maybe he should have demanded more clarity. Instead, he had chosen trust because it was easier than conflict. Now, that choice felt like weakness. Nights turned into battlegrounds. He tossed and turned until dawn, his head filled with unwanted images of her sharing wine with her ex, laughing at private jokes, their shoulders brushing, maybe their hands finding each other in a way that once felt natural. He pictured her leaning in close, listening intently, or worse, giving him the same kind of smiles she once saved only for him. The scenarios weren't real, but they felt real enough to keep him awake. Heart pounding, sheets tangled around his legs like restraints. To fight the storm inside, he threw himself into distractions. He hit the gym with a desperation he'd never felt before, pushing his body harder than it wanted to go, sweat pouring, muscles screaming, as if pain could drown out jealousy. Some nights, when the silence became unbearable, he poured himself a drink, then another, letting the burn numb the ache for a few hours. Other times, he simply shut himself away from everyone, ignoring calls and invitations, staring blankly at walls, or losing himself in mindless scrolling, anything to stop the carousel of thoughts that spun endlessly in his head. But no matter what he did, the questions always returned, sharper than before. The breaking point came on a rainy evening. He wasn't looking for trouble when he opened his social media feed. It found him. A photo appeared, tagged by a mutual acquaintance. There she was, standing beside her ex, both smiling at the camera. The caption read, innocently enough, "Old friends on a trip." But it wasn't the caption that gutted him. It was the body language. She wasn't just standing beside him. She was leaning slightly toward him, her arm brushing his, the kind of closeness that spoke of comfort, of familiarity. Her smile was wide, natural, the kind she hadn't given in their last few photos together. He froze, staring at the screen until his vision blurred. The rational part of his brain tried to argue. It's just a photo. Maybe it means nothing, but the deeper part of him, the part that felt every subtle shift in her tone and every missing piece of affection, knew better. The picture told a story words couldn't hide. It was proof of something he had feared all along, that there was still a connection between them, one that didn't include him. In that moment, it didn't matter whether they had crossed any physical lines. Betrayal wasn't always measured by kisses or touches. Sometimes it was in the way someone smiled, the way their body leaned, the way they gave their energy to someone else instead of you. And staring at that photo, he realized with a crushing certainty that a piece of her had already left him, and no amount of polite replies or blind trust could bring it back. The sound of the door clicking open after days of silence was almost surreal. She stepped inside with her usual grace, dragging her suitcase behind her as though she had returned from nothing more than a casual weekend away. Her smile was polite, almost practiced, as she greeted him. "Hey, I'm back. How was everything here?" Her tone was light, unaffected, as if she hadn't just shaken the foundation of their relationship with a single message, and a trip that still echoed in his mind like a nightmare. He forced his lips into a faint smile, his voice steady despite the fire raging beneath his skin. Everything was fine, he said. The lie tasted bitter, but he swallowed it. On the outside, he looked calm, but inside, his chest burned with questions he had rehearsed 100 times during her absence. He told himself to wait for the right moment, but every time she laughed lightly or moved through the room as if nothing had happened, his patience crumbled a little more. That evening, over dinner, he could no longer hold back. The clink of cutlery against plates felt like a drumbeat in his head until he finally set his fork down and asked the question that had haunted him. "Why did you go with him?" His voice was low but sharp, trembling with the effort of restraint. "And why didn't you tell me earlier? Why drop it on me like that?" She paused mid-bite, her brows knitting slightly. "You're overreacting," she said after a beat, her tone dismissive. "It was just a trip. I told you about it, didn't I? If I had something to hide, I wouldn't have mentioned it at all." The calmness in her answer only fueled his anger. "Just a trip?" he repeated, leaning forward. "Do you even realize what it felt like? You send me a message out of nowhere saying you're going with your ex, and then what? Cold updates like you're writing to a stranger. Do you realize what that does to someone who loves you?" Her eyes hardened, and she sighed as if his words were a burden. "You're being dramatic. Nothing happened. You're making this into something it isn't." The conversation escalated, words firing back and forth, the air between them thick with tension. At last, something in her slipped. "Maybe I needed closure," she snapped, her voice louder now. "Maybe there were things left unsaid between us, and I wanted to end it properly. Isn't that better than keeping secrets?" His chest tightened. Closure. The word echoed like a curse. "Closure," he spat. "With him? And you thought the best way to get it was to disappear with him for days and leave me here questioning everything." Her voice softened, though it carried an edge of defiance. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I told you the truth because I thought honesty mattered. I thought that would count for something." He stared at her, torn between rage and despair. "Do you realize what you did to me?" His voice cracked despite his effort to keep it strong. "Do you understand how it felt, lying awake every night, wondering if you were laughing with him, sharing things with him that used to belong to us? You shattered my trust. You didn't even think about how I would feel." She crossed her arms, defensive now. "I told you openly. Doesn't that prove I had nothing to hide? If I wanted to betray you, I wouldn't have said a word. You should be glad I was honest." The words hung in the air like smoke. Was she guilty of betrayal, or simply insensitive beyond measure? He couldn't tell. Her logic was twisted, but not entirely wrong. It left him standing on unsteady ground, unable to decide if she had wronged him unforgivably or if he was clinging too tightly to suspicion. The morality of it all blurred, leaving only raw pain and confusion. Silence fell between them, broken only by the dull hum of the refrigerator in the corner. He leaned back, her face swimming in his vision, and he thought of his friend's voice echoing in his head. Respect is not optional. Without it, love is nothing. That was the heart of it. It wasn't about whether she had crossed a line physically. It was about respect, about how little she had considered his feelings before making her choice. He looked at her, the woman he loved, and knew he stood at a crossroad. He could try to forgive, to rebuild, to stitch the torn fabric of their bond with patience and hope. Or he could walk away, reclaiming the self-respect that had been slipping from his grasp ever since her message arrived. The decision weighed heavy in his chest, but one truth was clear. Whatever he chose, things would never be the same again. The silence that lingered after their confrontation was heavier than any argument. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not just the woman he had loved, but the choices she had made, the disregard wrapped up in casual words and careless actions. His chest ached with the weight of what had been said and what had been left unspoken. The time for pretending was gone. Two paths stretched before him. The first was final, sharp, and painful but clear. He could end it. He could reclaim his dignity, scarred though it was, and step away from the cycle of doubt and disrespect. Self-respect, he realized, was not negotiable. It was worth more than blind love, more than clinging to a relationship that made him feel small. If he chose this path, he would walk away, perhaps hollow at first, but with his head high, wiser and stronger for the wounds he carried. The scar would remain, but so would the lesson. Never let love blind you to the absence of respect. The second path was less defined, blurred by hope and risk. He could stay. He could give her one more chance, but not without boundaries carved in stone. Never again, he would say, respect me or lose me. This choice meant building on fragile trust, one misstep away from collapse. The future would remain uncertain, every silence between them a potential crack, every smile a test. But it would be a choice to believe that people could learn, that love could heal if both fought hard enough. It was the harder road in many ways because it meant living with the constant shadow of doubt. Whichever choice he leaned toward, the truth was inescapable. Things would never return to what they had been. That innocence, that blind comfort, was gone. Later that night, alone again, he scrolled back to the beginning, the message that started it all. Going on a sudden trip with my ex. Hope you're fine. His own reply stared back at him. No problem. Take care. He let out a hollow laugh. I lied. He whispered to himself. There was a problem. A big one. And I will never ignore it again. In the stillness, his thoughts crystallized into a truth he wished he had known earlier. Love without respect is poison. It seeps in quietly, disguised as compromise, until it erodes trust and dignity. Silence, he realized, could be more destructive than arguments, because silence leaves wounds festering, unanswered, and unseen. But growth, real growth, comes when a person finally chooses self-worth over fear of losing someone. That choice, whichever way it unfolded, would define him more than her actions ever could. He understood now that sometimes love survives, and sometimes it doesn't, but respect, once broken, rarely heals. And in that knowledge, he found the beginning of freedom. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe. Our channel, Awesome Visual Story,